So this is a feature I've been working on some time ago, and it is worth a demo because it needs just a little bit of discussing, but we've had an open issue for a while now to be able to include or exclude particular features from certain tenants, but allow them on other tenants. So this allows a bit of configuration for that. There's no UI for it yet at the moment because that's probably the discussion point. But let me demonstrate how it works for a start. So at the moment it's configured through your app settings configuration. So we have a setting in the app settings called features, and then we have rules that you can apply to the various features. And I'll explain, but because of the way ASP.NET Core configuration works with arrays, these are I've defined these as specific places in the array because they're a key value pair rather than an array. And when you're merging them, like we do here, it can mess up with things if you don't use that. But the idea is you can have a role which either excludes an expression based on the feature names, or we have an include rule here. So what I've done here is, by default, for some reason I decided to pick on orchard core.templates. I don't know why, but by default they are excluded from all tenants. But then on default tenant we use an include rule where the default tenant, i.e. the host, gets everything. So it's a star there for that. And then on the blog, I use the same rule again because I was just being specific. And I've included the agency theme where it's excluded up here on all the other tenants. So the blog is the only tenant that can, and the default tenant, the only one that can run the agency theme or see it. So how this will work is with the sites that I've got here. If we look at the features for the host tenant, we'll see that they'll have the templates feature. And if we look at their themes, you'll see that they have as the agency theme. If we go across to blog 1, which was the one which it's excluded from, you'll see if you look in the features list here, the templates are not available. And if we look in the themes, we'll see that on this particular theme, the agency is allowed because we specified that. But if we go to another one of the blog ones here, blog 2, which doesn't have any specific rules, you'll see there's no agency theme to be selected. If we look at the features, there will the templates feature because it's not listed. So that's the feature. What we need to do now, or what I need to do now, is put some UI around it so that we can also configure this from the UI, so that we can potentially go in here and have a list of features that you could check on and off, which would set the rules for you in your app settings file. Any questions at this point?
I have comments, I have suggestions, well, things to think about. So it's not a suggestion, it's just, let's think about that. So right now your rules, they are at the tenant level. What if the rules were at the feature level? Meaning when we edit the features, or when we're on the feature screen, we could say, hey, be careful, this feature is only allowed on the default tenant or only allowed on blog 1, blog 2. You see the opposite direction. Or is disallowed on the new tenants.
So when you're creating a tenant, do you mean, or when you're in the features?
I mean the setting right now that yeah, the screen will follow the settings, but the settings here are defined per tenant for each feature. What if a setting was defined per feature for each tenant? So it will be
So
like
you can,
allow, disallow, and you will list tenants. Like you could do star for all tenants, or you could do. Would it make sense to say, because here the issue is that if I add a new tenant, then I have to add new rules.
like this, for example.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, or you could say well, there could be an allow disallow with different patterns. This way I could say exclude star to exclude this feature from all the tenants. Or exclude not default to say, you see what I mean?
Yeah, so you'd put the rule in there as well, so
and both have advantages actually, because what I'm talking about will help when you create tenants, because when you create a new tenant, it has no roles, right?
Correct.
Which means
and it could go either way on this. I did wonder, similar to what you were thinking about, whether we did it on a tenant by tenant basis or whether we did it on a feature by feature basis. I think I kind of settled on maybe it makes sense to have your default tenant tends to be the one that you let everything happen on, but your other tenants tend to be the ones that you want to restrict down a little bit.
So
but that's just my particular experience, so it could be.
Could it be fixed by creating profiles that you can inherit from and override? So a profile will define what features can be enabled or not. The default profile is just allow everything and is applied to the default tenant. But then you can also have a default profile for new tenants. And then you could use your rules to override the profiles.
So that could work quite well and could solve one of the other problems that I have. Actually, I like that. For example, so let's say.
And it's just a set of rules, like you have that, like include, exclude. Okay, each profile is a set of rules, include, exclude, and you can point to a profile and add more rules to override the profile. But this way, you can even admin the profiles in the UI.
Yeah. So the problem with this whole thing with the configuration stuff that I ran into when I started to look at the UI is because of this key value pair thing, and because when we look at the actual app settings that we write in here, when we actually save the tenant settings, when you edit the tenant here and set them up, we actually only allow to write strings here. We can't write configuration key pairs because we merge from so many different places. It's complicated to merge them correctly.
So it has to be in the database?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the database, but we can write strings. So a profile name, write quite easily.
So just one, this way in the profile solves the issue. I see.
So the profile actually solves that issue, but you would still have to edit your app settings manually to write the rules for the profiles, unless we put it in the database,
Yeah.
which is another option.
Well, if you want them to be dynamic, they have to be in database. If they can be static, then yeah, it's.
I would have thought it was enough that they could be static, but the idea of profile does.
If it's based on per feature, it should be able to be static, because you can only add a feature or a module statically. You have to reference it. So at that point, you can say, and by default, this feature is not available unless for default. And then you redeploy.
Yeah, or you're using the database shells connection, so that's actually stored in the database, so you can edit it. It becomes a lot simpler, I suppose, code-wise, to have a screen here which selects profile rather than listing all the features and ticking and deselecting them.
But it's also hard to enforce the profile if it's in database, because it's too late maybe to enforce it. Let's say you change the profile, you disable a feature, but it's already enabled on the tenant.
So I should point out actually that this feature doesn't, all it allows you to do is enable features from the UI or to see them in the UI. It doesn't scan the dependencies if you suddenly disallow a feature and turn it off. It doesn't stop a recipe, or it stops a recipe that's being run here, but it doesn't stop a setup recipe. Stops the setup recipe from enabling a feature, but it doesn't stop a module taking a dependency on a feature and force enabling it or anything like that. So all it does is, because
I think it should do it at the lowest level, like when we list the features to enable, we should say no, it's part of the disallow list, so we can't do that.
Yeah, so it's on the listings, but it's not on any of the dependency. Like if it does check the dependencies of your features, so if there's a dependency of a feature that you're not allowed, then you won't be able to install it as a tenant. Yeah, no, so actually it pretty much does do all that, except for turning features off when you change the disallow list.
Yeah, dynamically that's fine. At least if on startup it prevents it from being executed. So yeah, that's necessary to be able to manage what features are available per tenant, but we need to find a way. Profiles might be a good solution, because it's like roles, but for tenants. Because when you have tenants, you know what type of tenant it is, and you're like, oh no, this is the standard plugin tenant, so it has access to these properties. You don't want to set them up again all the time. You want to reuse a predefined set of rules. And then if you want to override with custom rules, sure, that might be part of the settings. But being able to select a profile and change the profile, that might be nice.
Yeah, well, I think a name profile is nice, and I'll have a look. Maybe there's a way we can store that in the database. Should be possible.
Yeah, I'm sure if it's part of the core features, because today the list of I'm sure it can be in the database somehow.
Yeah, so potentially if it was profiles, then we might end up with a similar UI to the media profile stuff. Whereas you create a profile, you just have a list of features that you can check or disable.
Yeah, then there's a question. Can you have two lists, like the allow, the denied, or is this just whitelisting? And then when there is a new feature, you can't add it to any any tenant, because it's not there, you have to add it to the profile first.
It would have to would want to be a setting, wouldn't it? You might have an include list, or you might have an exclude list. You,
You might want
side by side. Yeah,
that's hard to say actually, because when you reference a new module and you restart, do you want the feature to be? Yeah, let's do that. Let's make it available by default, but the profile is just disabling features. That's what you want. Today we have everything available, so let's just make the profile to be able to disable stuff.
I think that would make more sense. It's simply more about
because usually you want the profile to prevent stuff from happening, like so.
Yeah, like if you have a couple of modules that are specific to one client, you don't want them showing up on the list of another tenant at all.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, good ideas.
And
could we in any case have an extension point for cases where you want to implement your own logic? So not just overriding the whole service, but within there.
Well, the validation service at the moment is based around those rules, so you could always jump in there, I imagine.
Yeah, but basically what I'm talking about, that this code would be in the implementation of I don't know, feature validation rule provider, and this service would execute all of these. So
today, when the list of features to enable is built, we should have an event that say, okay, this is the list of features to enable for this tenant. Remove some or add some, and then your feature DIN will just also remove some or add some. In this case, remove some, but then Zoltan's feature will be able to remove some or add some based on their own rule. So the profile is one way to change this list, and then you can add some other coding-based ways to change this list. But it's done during the event when the list of features to enable is built. There is the thing in the shell services, like get enabled features, and when it's computed,
get all features.
And when it's computed, you apply the profiles here, and something else can do something else on this list. Remove, add, whatever, from any logic.
Yeah, makes sense.